So I'm Avis Jolly. I am the Impact Officer with the El Dorado Community Foundation. And this is one of the reasons I was brought on to the organization about 1.5 years ago, is to give our nonprofits tools and resources to do better. Because if you guys are doing the best you can do and are the best you can do, that helps our community. No matter if you're helping horses or you're helping veterans, that's a big deal for our entire community to lift it up. We are starting our series of 5 classes today, our first one being governance. And then we'll roll into next week will be organizational structure. Housekeeping wise, good news. Yesterday we finished on time with those on the East Slope that attended the East Slope session. So definitely should hit that mark again today for you guys. As far as questions go, during the session, we won't answer them live. Bill may see one that's very relevant and grab it, or Hillary at the time of their presentation, and may answer it live, but otherwise I will be grabbing them and answering them at the end, or I'll be answering them live in the chat as we're going, or one of the staff members will for the organization. In addition, yes, the chat will be sent to you because you'll find that people are listing out resources like crazy. We're going to send you a copy of the presentation, and we're recording it. So you'll get a recording too once we're all done. So don't worry too bad if you miss something, because you will get all that whenever we are finished. It will probably be Tuesday because it is Friday and Monday is MLK. And we are off. So let's get started. Your presenters today for your first session, which is governance, is Bill Roby, the Executive Director of El Dorado Community Foundation, and Hillary Mulligan, who is our Community Coordinator. Everybody kind of knows what the Executive Director does. Hillary's role with us is basically liaising with a lot of our community nonprofits, especially whenever it comes to like programs that they're interested in doing and stuff. I'm kind of the one that helps everybody build and gets that structure in place. She's really a great sounding board for, I'm thinking about doing this, or I might be doing this, you know, what do you think? Do you have any ideas, any resources and stuff? So she and I very much work together and stuff, and she has a lot of experience, including with some big nonprofits. So she's kind of seen it all. So she's a perfect one to do governance today. So I will hand it off to them. Again, use the chat for questions. Feel free to chat back and forth with each other as well. And just make sure you're on mute, and off we go.
So Hillary, kick it off and bring up the first slide. So welcome to Building a Better Nonprofit. A little bit of housekeeping. If you hear this sound,
with our unique
that's not the one.
Just a day, Bathfitter doesn't just fit your.
That means the staff of the foundation is pulling me back because I'm about to go down a rabbit hole. I am passionate about the work that we do at the foundation. And oftentimes I will go down a rabbit hole, and that's where sometimes the passion leads me. And as strange it may sound, I'm very passionate about governance and structure because I know how incredibly important both of those are to organizational development. So go ahead, Hillary, and advance it forward to the next slide. And so why are we here? Why are we having this conversation about building a better nonprofit? When I started at the foundation in 2007, it didn't take very long for me to understand some very important components of who we were as a foundation. We were providing program support back to the communities of El Dorado County with one competitive grant process a year. Over the course of time, fast forward to now 2022, we have 15 different competitive grant processes that are going on throughout the year. So we have a lot of funding that's being funneled back to the nonprofit sector for program, but we don't have anything for capacity for the actual organization. So I have been talking to the board and to donors for many years now about the foundation focusing on the capacity of organizations to grow internally, to help meet the needs where they're at. Because as we all know, excellence is expensive. And if we're going to get excellent outcomes from our nonprofit sector, we have to be willing to afford them that level of funding to bring them up, to elevate them, to make them even a better organization than they already are today. So we're going to start by talking about the very basics of organizational structure, which is governance. Go ahead, Hillary, or Chris, whoever is guiding. I think it's Hillary that's guiding this. So governance, go on to the next one, Hillary. Governance is really articulated as who is overseeing the organizational development from an oversight perspective. And I was thinking about this last night after the presentation on the West Slope yesterday about how we all have boards, or we should have a board of directors or a board of some type or an advisory committee. And this is not unique. This is what I was thinking about last night. Is this is not unique to the nonprofit sector. It's also found very common in the corporate world. And in the corporate world, there are boards to protect the interest of the shareholder. And in the nonprofit sector, there are boards to protect the interest of the shareholder. And we call those donors. And we just have a different name for them. And a lot of the reasons why we have boards is exactly that, to protect the interests of those that are investing in our organization. So we have a couple of different board types here. We have advisory boards, we have cooperative boards, we have my absolute #1 favorite that we all wish we could have, a patron board that just gives you money and says yes to every desire that you have. And then we have the most common type, which is a management team, a working board, and a full governance board, a visioning board. Then there's also strategic boards. And each one of these boards has a very unique internal working mechanism. And they tend to go exactly in direct relationship to where the organization is. So at the very beginning, we start to see working boards. And those working boards evolve into, hopefully, a full governance board that then evolves into a strategic board that then evolves to the holy grail of boards, which is the visionary board. That's the one we would all like to get to, is to have a board that spends their time envisioning where we're going to be going because we have really arrived. So go ahead, Hillary, to the next one. So this is something I did after our presentation yesterday on the West Slope, was to give some meat to the bone of describing what these different kinds of boards are. A working board are board members that are actively engaged. These are board members that are doing the fundraising. Sometimes they're also doing program work. Governance board is where the board has been able to evolve out of the working board and moved more into governance. Sorry, I have got 3 Aussies, so they tend to go off. This evolution from a working board to a governance board really usually entails that the organization has started to hire staff. So it's allowed the working members of the board, for the working board, to now start to take on that governance role and responsibility. And then out of that, you should be evolving to that next level of becoming a strategic board, where the board is becoming much more strategic. So they're not only doing the governance, which is mandated by the state of California. So we all have to register with the state of California and the Internal Revenue Service to receive our 501c3 recognition. And the state wants us to have a board of directors. And so this governance board, which is making sure that we're in compliance to all the rules and the regulations of the state of California and the Internal Revenue Service, then takes on another role, becoming a strategic board. And that board is looking a little further down of goal sets. What can we possibly achieve? What is within our growth strategy that we don't get over our skis, but we can take on an additional component or develop a new program that we obviously see as part of our mission. of work. And the visioning board is that board that has a sustainable organization where the funding for operations is more than meeting what is needed. And the board can now look much further down the road at a 5 to 10 year time horizon about where do we want to go, what is it that we want to do, and how are we publicizing our work back into the community. So the one rule about boards is that they are there to provide the transparency organizationally and the guidance. It was a story I was telling yesterday during the West Slope presentation about a board meeting that I went to as part of there was a request that I come in and conduct a facilitated strategic session with a particular board. And this is an organization in Sacramento. And so as preparation for that, I went to their board meeting. And during the board meeting, which lasted an hour and a half, I would say 90% of the board meeting was comprised of the executive director talking and about 10% of the board engaging. And at the end of the meeting, the executive director came over to me and said, do you see what I mean? I don't get any engagement from my board. And that's why we need this facilitated session. And what I'm thinking is you didn't engage your board. There was absolutely no conversation that engaged the board. And what do you think? Is this a good way for us to go? What are your thoughts about direction, about how we're going to execute? Here's our program numbers. Do you see anything that could be problematic here? There was no lean-in opportunity for the board. And for a board to be engaged, you have to create that lean-in opportunity. There was another facilitated session that I talked about yesterday that I did in South Lake Tahoe, and that was with the Tahoe Resource Center. And they were also doing a strategic session, and I was just one component of that. But I presented the board boat. And this is, to me, the best analogy of how a lot of organizations run organizationally when it comes to their board, is you have a boat that is sitting at a dock, and that boat is your organization and it's tied to the dock. And your board members come and they pull into the parking lot and they park and they walk across the gangplank and they take their positions in the boat and they grab the hold of their oars, and the chair of the board and the executive director get up to the helm, and there's some talking that goes on, and then the meeting is over and everybody lets go of their oars, walks off the gangplank and gets back in their car and leaves. And the problem with that is the boat is still at the dock. It hasn't gone anywhere. And that's a lot of times what I see happens with boards. They're talking, but is there movement? And that coordinated movement is so important to break away from the dock, because everybody's got to row very succinctly and together. And there needs to be firm direction in order to move out from the dock into the slipstream of that river. And you all have to be rowing together. And then as you're starting to move down that river, you have to watch for the obstacles. And there needs to be that internal conversation going on to avoid those. And so that everybody is rowing together, avoiding the obstacles that are coming downstream from you as you move along. There's nothing better than be able to get into the slipstream of that river and let it take you where it's going to go. But you have to row to get into it. Go ahead, Hillary. So we're going to ask you now a question, but there's going to be a series of polls that we're going to have during this presentation. And we're going to ask you to take the poll, and this is one of them. And you're going to find some of them ridiculous. And that's just because we're wanting to help you stay engaged with us. So this one, though, is a little bit more serious. So what kind of organizational governance do you have? So we're getting a pretty even split right now. So we're looking at a pretty even split between volunteers who serve in both program and as board members, which would almost be a working board and a governing board, and then some in the strategic board as well. So it's a good split. And it helps us know organizationally where you're at, so that we know that we're targeting our different opportunities and trainings to the right organizations. Okay, you can take the poll away and go to the next slide. So the legal and moral health of organizations, bylaws. I'm of a firm belief that there's actually one bylaw in the entire world, and everybody just sort of copies it and rewrites it to meet the mandatory need of the state of California. The bylaws they always will follow the articles of incorporation when you're filing with the state of California, and then your bylaws are right behind there. One thing that came up yesterday that a lot of organizations were not aware of is when you modify your bylaws, you have to file that modification with the state of California. And there's a form that you fill out, and then you file that modification of the bylaws. And we will send that out next week when the link for this presentation goes out as well. So bylaws are not policy and procedure. Bylaws are much more structural, and it's how is the organization going to operate from a perspective of transparency. So how many years does the chair of the board sit as chair? What is the term of board members? Are there standing committees? Are there ad hoc committees? How are our board meetings run? So in the state of California, there is a legal requirement that in your board meetings, that if you're making a determination, a decision, and you're doing so electronically, that you have to have 100% agreement of the board to pass whatever that action item might be on your board agenda. So I'm going to say that again, because it's very important that if you're doing an electronic vote of your board, you do have to have 100% agreement. If you do not, you need to take that to a verbal, and it could be by Zoom electronically or an in-person meeting, so that you can vet out whatever that one disagreement was. So the state of California does not like to see resolutions passed or action passed by board members without 100% agreement. So that's why that rule is in place. Bylaws detail all that out. Bylaws have all that information in it about how the length of term of service for each board member, how long they're going to be there, what are the terms and the conditions of employment for the executive director, what role does the executive director play, what role does the chair play. Those are the things that are in bylaws. And again, there's lots of examples of bylaws that are out there. If anybody wants to take a look at the foundation's bylaws, we're happy to send it out to you as a template. And that is, again, it's just the legal and moral health of the organization. And I would urge you that to take a look at your bylaws if you haven't, and that you're in compliance. The foundation has a bylaws committee. It's an ad hoc committee that reviews our bylaws. Go ahead, Hillary. So does your organization have bylaws? And we have a winner. It's like everybody does. Yay. So again, just, take a look at them, make sure that they're updated and that they're still pertinent. That's very important. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So the next question is, does your organization pay attention to its bylaws? Yeah, I'm waiting for the one person that says, no, we don't. It's like, let's self-identify and own that. So thank you for the response on that. So insurance, which is also part of governance, that really should be the responsibility of the board of directors, is to make sure that the organization has insurance. And specifically, the board should understand that they have director and officers insurance coverage, and that is a liability coverage for directors and officers. We often call it D&O as an abbreviation. And what this does is it protects the directors and officers from financial liability. Primarily, that is the reason why you have D&O. So if an organization is engaged in doing dog rescue, and the organization incurs a debt to a transport company in Sacramento, and the organization goes out of business overnight, just closes down, the director leaves for Brazil, and there's this outstanding debt to this transportation hauler in Sacramento, the board is technically obligated to pay that out of their own pocket. And that's the fiscal responsibility that boards hold. And that's why boards should be educated in the financial structure of the organization. And that's the reason why you have D&O, director and officers insurance, is to protect the board in those liability situations. So there's some criteria to that the board has to meet to say that we were not aware of that outstanding invoice. We were not aware that we were running out of money. So there's a whole lot of things that would have had to gone wrong there in order for the board have to compensate for that open invoice. Things that upstream that would have occurred that the board had not paid attention to. And that's exactly what the board should be doing, is paying attention to the financial information so that you never have to use D&O. But D&O is there for that reason. And then the organization should have liability insurance, and that's just to protect you. And as I mentioned yesterday, when you look at your insurance policy, and it's always great to have it reviewed at least every 2 years. And insurance companies are happy to review your policy. Then one of the things you want to start asking them about currently is cybersecurity and having cybersecurity insurance. There's companies out there that are selling that, because you're collecting very specific information. And a lot of times this is private information that is protected. This is health information and part of HIPAA. And if that was ever breached and disseminated, you could be held liable for not having the protections in place that you needed and the safeguards and the firewalls. So just make sure that you have the conversation internally in your organization, making sure that you have cybersecurity insurance. And there are companies out there that are providing it. And have the conversation with your board around cybersecurity. It's very important right now because you have data, and that data can be breached and client information can be accessed. Go ahead, Hillary, to the next one. So conflict of interest. This is a form that all members of the foundation board and the foundation staff sign every January for the upcoming year, where we declare all of our conflict of interest. And again, this is a transparency. So it's a very basic form that your board members and your staff are filling out to list the conflict of interest. And you want to call out that conflict of interest, and that helps the executive director and the board chair both to understand when conflict comes into play. So if I'm on the board of an animal rescue organization and I'm also on the board of the SPCA in Sacramento, I need to declare that is a conflict of interest. So if ever the SPCA comes forward with a grant request, I would recuse myself from voting or talking about that topic. Now, this is something that has come up with some organizations over the last 15 years that I've been the director. I've had executive directors and directors ask me, does this prevent a board member from speaking on a topic or just voting? For me, it prevents both. Because in speaking, you're advocating, which is exactly what the conflict of interest is meant to do, is to call out that you have a conflict of interest here, so you should neither advocate nor vote. So pretty clear on the conflict of interest. Go ahead, Hillary. Policy and procedure, and this is very critical for every organization, and very different for nonprofits. And there's a very specific reason why. For a corporation, I worked for Benetton for many years, and Benetton sold. I didn't work with a clothing line. I worked with a sports group, so they sold tennis rackets. Well, if you're selling tennis rackets, all your policies and procedures around an inanimate object. So it's very easy to create policies and procedures of how that business operated, because we're dealing with a tennis racket. For community organizations, policies and procedures are a little bit more, not challenging, but a little bit more in flux, because the community that we're dealing with is constantly changing. So our policies and procedures need to consistently modify with the community need. So I would never look at our policies and procedures as being static forever. These are going to change, because we may have a policy that becomes outdated or non-relevant, or we have something that's occurring in the community that we're having to respond to with a certain procedure that we had not anticipated. So case in fact, Caldera Fire. For the foundation, we executed not only policy and procedure that we had no idea that we were going to be doing, that our action preceded the policy and procedure, because we had to act so quickly. So there was no policy and procedure in place to guide us through that 4 weeks of just very intense work that we did as a foundation. And so now we can go back when we have a moment in time to say what worked, what didn't work. Do we need a policy for this? Do we need a procedure for that? Now the foundation does have some very firm policies around our spending policy, for our endowments policy, for what gifts the foundation can accept. We have procedures about how we operate in certain circumstances. But again, I want to acknowledge that we as a nonprofit sector have to be nimble to meet the need of the community, because that is an organism that is in constant change. Go ahead, Hillary. So overall strategic instruction and guidance, engage your board, bring them in, have them be part of the conversation, and part of the conversation on what the board should be doing. I think there's no better conversation between an organizational staff and a board, and then having that interchange of ideas. What is it that we're doing? What are we having a hard time with? Where do we go? And again, one of the things that does come up that I hear oftentimes from either board members or from other executive directors is the line of responsibility. Who's responsible for what? And how at times board members can cross over that line and get into day-to-day operations. And that is a conversation, if that does occur, that's a conversation for the director to have with the board president, the board chair, because that should not occur. And the reason why is you've hired the person for a reason. You've hired them to direct the day-to-day operation. Now, if you're not happy with their performance, take it to the board, and the board can have a conversation on it. And if the board wishes to take a corrective action or give instructions to the director, that is appropriate. But for a board member to be in the office, giving directions on the day-to-day operations. That is disruptive. It is wrong. It is not the way to go about assisting the organization that they're a part of. That is overreach. And the reason why is because you've hired a person to do that job. And if you're not happy, then take it to the board of which you're a part of, and have that discussion there. The next slide, Hillary. So fiduciary oversight and controls, I'm not going to get into a whole lot of this because the staff told me yesterday that I went down the rabbit hole on this one, and started to explain about fiduciary structures of nonprofits, which is going to come up in another presentation. So I'll just leave it with that. The board has fiduciary oversight and should be maintaining controls within the organization. And that those controls meet the guidelines for audits. And if you're not audited, I know audits are expensive. Have a conversation about being audited every 3 years or every 4 years or every 2 years. Audits are very important because it gives an outside glimpse into the organization and the organizational health. But the board is responsible for the fiduciary oversight of the organization. And they should be looking at those financial numbers and understanding what they mean. And they should make sure that at least the board officers, which tend to be your board president, the board vice president, the treasurer, and the secretary, and Hillary's going to go into that, so I'm not going to steal your thunder, Hillary, that those should be aware of the internal controls inside the organization. And that is how there's a division of responsibility when it comes to handling donations. That's very critical. So now I've done a much better job than I did yesterday in not going down rabbit holes because I knew my buzzer was sitting over here. And now I get to hand it off to Hillary. Hillary, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Bill. So as you move through this developmental process of transitioning from a working board to a governing board, you'll want to define, as Bill mentioned, each board member's role. So let's take a look at organizational structure. At this point, as you transition to governing board, you'll want to have completed these steps. You've set up a financial system, including budgets, general ledger, reimbursement policies. You've created and you're implementing a development fund plan with donor identification, mailing and digital campaigns, and you've identified grant opportunities. Also, you have program definition with volunteer recruitment and training and needs identified. You've established the organization's presence. You have an identity with a mission statement, a logo, and social media presence. And also, you're implementing good governance practices. You have defined policies and procedures, you're holding regular meetings, and you're timely with your IRS reporting. The composition and structure of the board is essential, of course, to the board's ability to function and represent the community served. So here we've outlined the basics of composition and structure, your best practices. All board members should be personally committed, of course, to the organization, willing to volunteer sufficient time and resources to help achieve your mission. And they also understand and fulfill their fiduciary responsibilities. No board member should occupy more than one officer position at the same time within the organization. The majority of the board should consist of members unrelated to each other or unrelated to staff. This will allow for significant deliberation and diversity. So also to ensure broad public participation, board members should serve no more than 10 consecutive years. They can certainly do more, but just not 10 consecutive is the recommendation. Board membership should reflect the diversity of the organization's constituencies. And board members who are not employees should not receive compensation other than reimbursement for their expenses directly related to board duties. If staff membership on the board is deemed necessary, it should be limited to the executive director of the organization, but not in an officer position. The board nomination process should be an internally driven process to ensure you have the right balance of skill sets, background, and diversity of thought. Board committees should be organized as needed to structure members' roles and responsibilities effectively. And also, each board should annually evaluate itself with a survey, and the board should discuss the results as a full board. So in the state of California, nonprofits are required to have 3 individuals, and those individuals will serve as your chair or president, secretary, and treasurer. It's recommended that you have 7 total to give you greater diversity and deliberation. So let's take a look at the different positions. The board chair chairs the meeting of the board after developing the agenda with the executive director. They help guide the board actions with respect to organizational priorities and governance concerns. The chair monitors financial planning and financial reports, and the chair plays a leading role in fundraising activities. Your secretary maintains and distributes minutes of the board. They serve as the official record keeper of the organization, and the secretary should be sufficiently familiar with legal documents of the board of the organization, the articles, the bylaws, IRS letters, and more. The treasurer prepares annual budget for board approval. They ensure development and board review of financial policies and procedures. And the treasurer works with the bookkeeper or CPA as appropriate to prepare and present the financial statement. A few more board member roles would include your vice chair, who's preparing to assume the role of the chair. They assist the board chair in the execution of duties. They serve on committees to learn the operations, and the vice chair would work closely with your board chair to transfer knowledge and history of the organization as they prepare for leadership. It's great to have a committee chair who ensures that members have the information needed to do their jobs. They oversee the logistics of committee operations. They report to the board chair on committee activities, and they initiate and lead the committee's annual evaluations. For board members at large, really regular attendance of board meetings is very important. They make a serious commitment to participate in activities related to committee work. And your board members should always volunteer and willingly accept assignments and complete them thoroughly and on time. And of course, participate in fundraising of the organization. It's recommended that a board should meet as frequently as needed to conduct the organization's business, but at a minimum, a board should meet at least 4 times a year with a quorum present. Here we've outlined 2 different agendas, your strategic agenda, which is a typical board agenda, and they should be distributed at least 72 hours in advance of the meeting. Also, we have a sample consent agenda. To improve the efficiency of your meetings, we strongly suggest a consent agenda. The consent agenda allows for a preview of the meeting's topics and agendas, and it avoids lengthy committee reports. You would want to send the consent agenda at least a week in advance so your board members can read over and prepare for the meeting. The enclosures that you would typically include would be approved minutes from the prior meeting, all committee minutes for meetings conducted since the last board meeting, all reports and materials related to the consent agenda, and any critical details pertaining to the current presentations, reports, and discussion items planned in your upcoming meeting. So highly recommend the consent agenda. Here's a look at a checklist for your annual board tune-up. These are discussion items that you would want to remember to include in your board agendas at some point throughout the year. That includes review and approve all compensation paid to executive director, review all of the nonprofits policies, your conflict of interest policy, your gift policy and practices, and whistleblower policies and procedures, whichever board policies you've established, definitely give them an annual review. Also, confirm annual filings. The full board should review the IRS Form 990 prior to filing. And also, once it's been filed, it should be reported back. to your board. Review the proposed board agenda and approve the budget, and also know that this may be adjusted, of course, throughout the year. Review and accept the independent financial audit in addition to your regular financial reports. Ensure your insurance policies are renewed and review these over the year, especially as Bill mentioned, including new policies or enhancing your policies such as for cybersecurity. Nominate and elect the board of directors and officers in accordance to your bylaws, and bring attention to board members when their term is expiring, and share this with all the board members and as you move through the process of identifying and cultivating new board members. Remind the board about expectations for them to participate in fundraising, and we'll discuss that more in the upcoming slides. But definitely recognize their successes and set goals together for fundraising. This is a list of suggested board committees with subcommittees, and Avis will touch on this in upcoming Building a Better Nonprofit session. But we just wanted to outline your 5 major committees. A few meeting minutes and a few tips. So recording a meeting, it can be very helpful to record your Zoom calls. The only issue there is they provide an a visual transcription, but not a written. So also transcribing notes can be very timely. So make sure you find maybe a free recording app on your iPhone that has transcription services for a small fee. Free would be better. Also, with the minutes of your board, please always remember that your board minutes serve as a legally binding document. So make sure your secretary distributes the minutes in a timely manner to all members. This will help give them plenty of time to accomplish their assigned action items before the next meeting. And use a minutes template as you as you take notes in your board meetings, because a template will make you much more efficient, and that template should mirror the agenda exactly with every action item, votable items listed. So it's really helpful to take your agenda, alter it into a minutes format, so whoever your note taker is can be very efficient and capture everything. Also, just make sure your board permanently retains the minutes and makes them available when needed. We have a poll. Which quality is important in a board member?
So this is my favorite poll, that your board member have a beating pulse. I know many times it's hard for organizations to find board members, so I threw that one in, as well as the dress as well.
Well, definitely everyone sees the value of fundraising, and no dress as well, though. Okay, we're going to close this poll. Oops, sorry. So let's talk about traits of an effective board member. The purpose of a board is to build a team that relates well to each other, has great diversity in their experience, and excellent insight. So you want board members who have some of these essential traits that you'll look for as you're onboarding them and vetting new members. You do want to avoid board members who are just in search of a seat for personal gain, and usually you can determine that through conversations as you go through the selection process. So some of the traits of effective board members are those individuals that are prepared to accept legal and fiduciary responsibilities. They share in the founder's vision and have a passion for the organization's mission. They understand the case for support. They give their own time and resources, including money. Willing to identify, cultivate, and recruit donor prospects and new board members. They understand that fundraising isn't just a function, and your board members will be so critical to bringing new donors to the organization. So definitely through the vetting process of new board members. Make sure they're really aware of how important fundraising is to your organization. They bring valuable and diverse skills and perspective, but they're also team players. And they contribute to the business plan and governing documents. They have an enthusiasm for the nitty-gritty details of board operation and of the organization's functions and policy and procedures. So let's move on. I know that sometimes people mention that they have a working board, but their board gives so much of their time, but not their finances. And it doesn't have to be an enormous donation, but for a board member to speak really truthfully to a donor about giving to their organization, they should really consider giving as well, because they've done it, they've been there, and they've exemplified that they're willing to put their own money forward to an organization. And that's so important with donor relationships, if to speak honestly with them. We have a poll. What would a great board member say about their service? Okay, that's a pretty straightforward one. We do want enthusiastic board members. So just looking at board recruitment processes, it's great to have a recruitment committee and have a set of rules and responsibilities when you are recruiting that you can present to a potential member, and make your expectations clear that their job is to govern, give, and grow the organization and themselves. Orientations are really important. It's great to have a formal orientation process with tours, staff introductions. Also consider having board member mentors for your new recruits. Someone who's seasoned, who's been on the board for a while, that can really have great, frank conversations with new recruits and answer all their questions. Educate your board members. Teach them the elevator speech so they feel really confident speaking about your organization. And train your board members how to make the ask for funding. Send them on calls with experienced board members and staff. At my prior organization, we would do role play with our philanthropy officers. Whoever was going to meet with the donor, we would role play the donor's position, the staff member, the board member, because really it gets you so comfortable on your speaking points, your talking points, who's taking turns, and then what if they say this, who's responding, what will the response be? It ingrains in your mind what your response will be. And research is really important too. Research your donors. So you know who you're really speaking with, and everybody share that research on the team. So you're all really aware of who you're talking to. And that could be some sensitive information. So it's always very confidential. And lastly is engaging your new board members. Including them, or all of your board members, including them in cultivation and stewardship events. It's great to have each board member meet annually with your executive director to discuss their personal goals and aspirations for the organization. And again, engaging your board members to discuss their personal contacts and develop a prospect list and making calls, contacting the contacts that they bring forward to you. We used another just throwback to my prior organization. Each meeting, staff throughout the country would have the opportunity to present a request for contacts to the board of directors. Because your board has such a breadth of knowledge and contacts, they can really help you in building relationships. Say you have a difficult problem, that you're working through, a project, could be in real estate, could be in a different transaction, and you need a contact with someone within that organization. So bringing that to your board member, giving them the full research and background of those individuals you're trying to connect with, giving them their alumni associations, past job experience, any details you can really garner, hobbies, whatever their hobbies are, clubs they belong to. Bring all of that forward to your board members, because like I said, they can be so critical in making a connection with an individual or a donor who you would like to move forward with in a relationship. And your board is so valuable as a resource for making connections. Here's a poll on how difficult is it for you to recruit new board members? Looks like challenging to somewhat challenging. And we encountered this yesterday too with our East Slope meeting. It definitely can be challenging, especially in the last year and a half, 2 years with COVID, how it's changed the structure of our recruitment, our meetings, our in-person activities. So it has put a little bit of a challenge on recruiting new individuals and retaining your donors, as we haven't had our traditional construct of gatherings. So definitely your challenge is recognized by all of us. So just a quick note on fundraising. Your board members are the biggest asset to the organization as far as your fundraising goes. Working in tandem with your staff. And it's critical that you're always transparent in your development conversations as you're recruiting board members and with each board meeting and with your development committee meetings. So fundraising in your board, these are some questions to consider or just issues. Are all your board members on the same page regarding fundraising? And if they're not, it means you need to be possibly having more conversations about fundraising. Make sure everybody really understands that. What your goals are and your hopes for their engagement as well. And again, that's when your board members are recruited through their long-term engagement. Fundraising is always a continual conversation. Host orientations, as we mentioned, educating your board on fundraising and their roles and responsibilities and engagement. We always say to encourage a culture of a philanthropy by speaking openly with your board. And ensure that they understand how critical they are to advancing the mission of the organization through their fundraising. Ideally, you have a giving board. You have 100% annual giving from your members. And I did mention that earlier about your working board members. They give so much of their time, and that's so true. But even the smallest amount counts, and it just does show that further commitment to the organization. And I hate to even say that, because I look at right now one of our groups on the East Slope, Housing El Dorado. I attended their board meeting yesterday, and they're just working day and night to facilitate the winter shelter. The board members are so actively engaged in, intaking individuals, helping with their COVID screening, all the meals. It's a full-time job. So I know everyone is working so hard as working board members, but we do encourage annually to make a gift, no matter how small, just that you've made that commitment as well. So it does back up your fundraising initiatives. Here's a poll. What would be helpful if the foundation offered board training to new board members? Would it be helpful? That looks like a yes. Okay, great. Looks like trainings would be helpful. Would the foundation need to offer incentives to prospective members to attend?
I think there's supposed to be a poll here. So I think we're.
Okay.
Hillary, go ahead, Hillary.
Oh, no, we've got great responses. 71% says no incentive. That's wonderful, but also a grant to the nonprofit their choice for participating. This is all good information for us that we'll take into account. So thank you. So now that you have this great team of board members, let's just look a little bit at retaining those members. Nonprofits, they can ensure effective board members continue by running through some of these, considering some of these action items for retaining your members. As Bill mentioned, you always want to engage your board as much as possible, give them a voice at every meeting. And one statistic I read is that with your virtual meetings, when you're on Zoom, if you allow a 5-minute period at the beginning of the meeting just for chit chat, that increases a member's participation in that meeting significantly. So just consider starting a virtual meeting, even though I know time is of the essence, consider just a little bit of social engagement at the very beginning, because it does make people more comfortable in participating later throughout the meeting. Also, remember to thank and recognize your board members to sustain their job satisfaction, thanking as often as possible. Staff and your executive directors should all lead by example through good attendance and active participation in board meetings. Also, conduct exit interviews for board members who leave at midterm or after their term is over. Exit interviews are very valuable in alerting the organization to what's working and what's not working through the meeting process each year, and through board membership happiness and sustainability. And also just always maintain that relationship between staff and your board members. Engagement is the key word, I think, that we have here. Here are some of the resources that we like to refer to. You have BoardSource, Boardable. The Impact Foundry in Sacramento is just phenomenal. And the National Council for Nonprofits. They all provide great resources online and free training throughout the year for all different topics related to nonprofit governance and organizational structure. So again, just don't forget to thank your board members, thank yourselves for this hard work that you all do in engaging the community. And just remember to always reach out to each other in our nonprofit community. We have a great breadth of knowledge and skill sets, and you can use these networks to raise awareness and seek advice for your cause. But just remember to thank those board members and continually engage them. So thank you. We have a little bit of time for Q&A.
So there was a question that was posed about how do you have a conversation with a board member that is not active? And what my suggestion is to have the conversation first with your board chair around the topic of that specific board member, and then that individual come in and meet with you and the board chair to have the conversation about their engagement, and ask them if it's just a matter of alignment. Are you uncomfortable given what we're asking you to do, and would you be comfortable in doing something else? Remember that not everybody is able to ask. That's not everybody's skill set. Some people are very uncomfortable with that, but they might have a skill set in another area that you can utilize. So by engaging them and asking them, where do you think is a good fit from the very onset, can help avoid those kind of situations where a board member doesn't seem to be as engaged as you need them to be. And it's just having the conversation and explaining to them why you need them to be engaged, and then let them make the determination.
Bill, do you see the next question? Can you continue on in this strain? From Jenny Hatch.
Let's see.
Bill, it's how do you resolve a conflict between a board member and a staff member?
And that's to meet with the board member individually to find out what the conflict is. And then to find out the suggestion from the board member what the resolution might be. And then you're acting as the arbitrator in that conflict. So you don't want to take a side. Definitely don't want to do that. You want to hear the concern from the board member, ask what they, and again, I would bring in the board president as part of that conversation, the board chair, and have the conversation about what's bothering them about that particular staff member, and then develop an action plan of how you're going to address it. Then have a conversation with the staff member as well, and present what the problem set seems to be from the board member, and then mediate. You're trying to find a middle ground.
I'll
And-
take the next question. It has to do with when do you ask board members for their financial commitment for the year? Generally, what I like to do, again, process-wise, is I build it into the calendar for the organization, do it at the beginning of the year. Because one thing that Hillary alluded to, it is very important, but also there are grants out there that actually ask, is your board a 100% giving board? If your board members do not have the financial ability to do it in January or in February, so you can clock that all year long on your grant, what I do is I basically do a pledge card and stuff. So at least I have documentation that my board has pledged that they will give at some point during the year and stuff. So at least I have that pledge documented as far as, ethically, that my board has committed to give throughout the year. So I tend to build it into the calendar as far as when my ask happens. And also, it's very upfront that board members are aware of it. In fact, a lot of my board applications that templates that I share with groups, I actually have that whenever a board member applies, that there is a radio box that they check, that they know that this is a giving board. And so they know that that commitment is coming. Not only are they going to attend meetings, but they're going to have a financial commitment. And again, as Hillary said, it can be a little bit. Generally on those grants, they do not ask, does your board give on average of $100? The question is, does your board give? $5 counts? The answer is yes, they did, even if it was only $5. So great question.
There is
Kathy,
something I brought up yesterday, and that's for all the directors on this call. And I've learned over 16 years of being the director of the foundation is, as a director, always keep a board member between you and a problem. And what that means is, when something occurs, either internally within the organization or externally, engage a board member. Keep that a board member between you and whatever that issue is. So I bring them in if there's something that's going on in the community that could become problematic, because I want them to be engaged, because it offers some buffer for me as the executive director, because that board member is now a part of this conversation. So it's not just me, and it's not just going to be a meeting with the board saying, Bill, why didn't you tell this was occurring? It's the board is actually engaged right away. And it's been very, very beneficial over the years. So to keep a board member between you and a problem.
Hi, this is Kathy. We had a question about if we're going to do a Zoom board meeting, board member training, and we are working on that, because just like you all, the West Slope had a similar response. But I did want to mention these next 5 weeks of these Zoom calls. Feel free to reach out to a board member that you think something would apply to and have them join you or join on this Zoom call. Anybody can sign up to join, but they might get a taste, especially the next one that Avis is doing, so that they see what's expected, and it's us telling them versus you.
And don't hesitate, and this builds on what Kathy and Avis and Hillary have articulated. The Eldorado Community Foundation is here to be a resource for you. We're not a competitor with you. We're here to build you. The majority of the gifts that we receive come in the forms of estate plans. And when you turn around and use that money back into the community to not only build your programs, but we're now going to start building your organizational capacity. So I want to say there's a lot of people on here, not a lot, there's a few that I've never seen before. So there's Todd from SOS Outreach. I don't think we've met. Ron Marlette is brand new, director of the Upper Room in Placerville. We have not had a chance to meet. And then there's a lot of people that I've known forever. So it's nice to see you. But anytime that you encounter a problem, don't hesitate to reach out. And that's part of what we're here for, is to assist you.
Anything else left in the chat, Kathy?
Yeah, one more. Yep. We are going to be sending this presentation out. As Avis said, maybe some of you came on late. Probably not till Tuesday, but we're working on it with the 3-day weekend coming up. Okay.
Yeah. So the package should include the recording, the presentation, as well as we can download the chat, because I know early on, whenever we were discussing the cybersecurity insurance, some people were really great sharing various resources and brokers that they had looked into, as well as we shared a link to our bylaws and where you can find some of our policies and procedures for the foundation. So those will be out there as well and stuff. So, well, we kept Bill from going down a rat hole today, which means you guys, we went even faster. I can't promise mine next week is pretty full. So next week will be organizational structure. So we'll do more of a deep dive into those different committees, including your leadership committee and stuff. We will go into that. We will go in a little bit more into some of the challenges. I know in the intro session, it was great. People shared challenges. So I'm actually going to address some of those challenges in the presentation that I give next week in organization. Again, as Kathy alluded to and Bill alluded to, it doesn't just have to be board members. It doesn't just have to be staff or executive directors. It can be a board member. If you feel that your treasurer just needs to pop into the financial one, by all means, send it to that one. It doesn't have to be the same person for each one. We do expect some fluidity in this, so you guys get the benefit of this. So again, if you haven't registered for next week, it's out there on our website. Just go to the website, and then under Building a Better Nonprofit is the registration. And anything that comes up, you can always feel free to reach out to myself, Avis, at eldoradocf.org. And as many of you know, you do have a resource right there on the East Slope, and Kathy Haven is our staff member that is there. She is an amazing resource. As I know you guys, she works for us, as well as she is tied into numerous nonprofits there in the basin. So she is a great resource for you guys as far as different entities and different resources there in the basin as well. So Kathy at eldoradocf.org, if you want to get that basin look at something, she's definitely one to reach out to. So
And
Bill, any
for
closing
this,
remarks? Yeah, Kathy, go for it.
I did just put all our emails in the chat. Okay, so for those of you, feel free.
Excellent. Bill, any closing remarks?
No, just thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you do and the service you do for your community. It is invaluable. The nonprofit community is the backbone of El Dorado County. So thank you.
Especially Tahoe.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Thank you all so much. Have a great long weekend. Stay healthy and safe. And hopefully I'll see some of you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.